Welcome everyone to the Cache County Planning Commission meeting, June 2nd, 2022. We begin our meetings with opening remarks and the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Spackman will lead the remarks and pledge today.
I'd like to give my opening remarks in the form of a prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, we're grateful to gather here tonight at this county meeting. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to serve, and grateful for the freedoms that we enjoy. Help us tonight that we might be able to be guided and directed in all that we do, that we might be able to exercise those agencies and our freedoms in the way that Thou would have us do. We're grateful for the time of year and for the moisture we've received, for the blessing that it is. We're grateful for all that we have, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. We'll stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. How's our agenda tonight, Chris? Is any changes on the agenda?
No changes on the agenda. Is that correct, Tim? I don't think we have anything.
Okay, any questions from commissioners on the agenda? If not, without objection, we'll adopt the agenda. Next item is review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting on May 5th. Everyone had a chance to take a look at those? Any issues or anything you saw? Okay, similarly, without objection, we'll adopt the minutes from our May 5th meeting. Okay, our first item on the agenda this evening is a consent item. For those of you in the audience, what that means is that that project meets all the requirements under our existing ordinances. And so generally these just get approved without further consideration. Is there anyone here to comment on the Cutler Valley subdivision? Okay, seeing none. Commissioners, what would you like to do on the consent item?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent item, the Cutler Valley subdivision, as proposed, with the conditions and the conclusion.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the consent item, Cutler Valley subdivision, is passed. Our regular action items tonight, the first one is on a rezone for the Vabel, thank you. I appreciate the help. We'll get a report from staff on that project.
I think we need to make a call to Craig. Is that right, Tim?
That's right.
The proponent is out of town but would like to be able to call in. So we'll go grab the phone from the office and prepare that quickly. If you can wait just a moment.
Okay, sounds good. While we're waiting, just a reminder, if you've come in this evening, please sign in so we have a record of your attendance tonight, and just make sure you do so before you leave. Thank you.
One let you on, Tim?
What's that?
Doesn't want to let you connect?
No, I think there's a button to push here.
I think it's recall one, maybe.
Thanks for your patience. I'm front and center with you guys.
Put it through the hole? Or it goes back there?
If we disconnect it, it'll be
Oh.
a minute to reconnect.
I didn't know it was still plugged in.
Want me to grab Janine?
What are we trying to sort out?
Project.
Recall one or two.
There we go. And then.
Get in your space again just for a minute. I think this is most people's worst nightmare, to be on conference call in front of like this many people. We'll see how he does.
Hello,
Hi, this is Chris with Cache County. How's it going?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, I've got you on the conference call with the Planning Commission. They're about to start that discussion in the hearing, so you're sitting right here by the Commission Chair and Vice Chair. So as you have questions, go ahead and just speak up.
Okay,
Does that work? Can you hear me okay?
I can.
And Commissioners, you can hear him okay? Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's Mr. Craig Vabel on the line, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so first, Mr. Vabel, this is Chris Sands, Planning Commission Chair. We're going to get a staff report from staff on the project, so it'll be a few minutes while we listen in.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, looks like we're up and running. Thank you for your patience. So this is a contextual photo or aerial image of the subject property. Agent and property owner Craig Vebel is requesting a rezone for the parcel highlighted here, which is about 4.36 acres, located at 200 east, 9800 north. It's very close to the Box Elder County boundary at the kind of west-northwest portion of Cache County, and in this area of residential development and subdivision, not far off of Highway 30. And so what's interesting about this property is the history, and we'll get into that a little more, but there is an existing non-residential structure and business on the property, as well as a residence. And in fact, this used to be 2 parcels. So this is an image that was provided in the staff report. And so when referring to previous parcel 10, that's located in the lower right corner, and that was initially approved through, I believe, conditional use as a business, which was allowed under previous code as a form of a shop and a metalworks business. And then at some subsequent point, it was assembled into 1 lot, which is the configuration today. And so the request is to rezone the property to R2, which would allow for re-subdivision of to create the original lot boundary, 2 parcels, one for the existing non-conforming business, and then one for the residential unit. And this is, as we understand from the applicant, to allow for more options in terms of financing and selling, or just in short, separating the commercial from the residential property. And so this has been an interesting analysis. Staff's finding is that there could be a recommendation of approval or denial from the commission, depending on what your preference or your determination is in terms of whether that non-conforming use might continue regardless of a rezone. And we've discussed it amongst staff and involved Taylor Sorensen, and so we were prepared to discuss this in terms of whether that non-conforming use could continue regardless of a rezone. I think it's important to note that the non-conforming commercial use would continue to operate without the rezone. So that's really not a comparison of how will it be used differently. It's more just a comparison of what options does the property owner have moving forward. And we could hear from the applicant in terms of how this might be beneficial moving forward. So that's a general summary of the request. And so staff's recommendation is that it could be considered for the Planning Commission to recommend approval or denial. And we'd like to turn time over for discussion.
Tim, that previous parcel, 10, so is that a separate parcel now?
No.
Okay.
Here's the
So it's
present
part of the
configuration.
4.36 acres.
That's correct.
Okay.
And RU2 zone would allow for a maximum of 2 parcels subdivided, and
That previous parcel, is that where the business is?
correct.
Okay.
And I might add that it does allow the property owner to further engage in discussion with the adjacent subdivision to potentially amend and clean up property lines, that or kind of reorganize what's been a little bit of remnant parcels and parcel numbers that are kind of out of sequence in this location. So.
Okay.
Just for the record, though, this says Your Son Ranch at the top, but this is not Your Son.
That's correct.
Ranch.
That's a,
Point that out.
thank you for pointing that out.
Other questions for staff, commissioners? At this time?
So right now, it appears to be 3 parcels, the big one and the 2 skinny ones just above it. At least that's what, like, when I query it, that's what comes up in the county.
So the little skinny parcel,
Yeah, those 2 skinny
Right.
ones. Okay.
and so that's where some of the cleanup is needed. And I do apologize for the mislabel. These were put together with, in replacement, another staff member, so.
Okay.
I have a question, Tim. In your finding of fact there at the end, it says that the existing commercial use is not in compliance with the original conditional use permit. Says the non-conforming commercial use is not in compliance with the original CUP approval.
So
What is not in compliance there?
the use, my understanding, is the same. It's operating as it always has, but the code has changed. This would no longer be allowed as a conditional use, so existing non-conforming was,
There's nothing that the owner's doing currently that's not in conformance with his conditional use approval.
I'm not aware of anything. I think
It's just the land use code has changed.
the land use code has changed, so it's typically referred to as a legal non-conforming use. It just doesn't meet the requirements of the zone anymore.
Okay, other questions for staff, commissioners? Okay, so this is a public hearing item. Commissioners, would you like to open the public hearing?
I'd make a motion to open the public hearing.
We have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, usually we begin our public hearing periods with the proponent. And so, Mr. Vabel, would you like to say anything to the commissioners about this proposal?
Yes, I would, please. Yeah, my name's Craig Vabel. I'm the owner of the property. It's actually owned through my business, Contact Manufacturing. And I purchased the property from actually I paid off a reverse mortgage that was on the property that my father had in place before he passed away. And so we bought it from the reverse mortgage company. So we're in ownership of that property now. And my father has had his automotive machine shop there since 1975 or so. And then he closed that up, retired, and then we started our business there in the tail end of 1999. And we've operated under that conditional use permit since that time, and had an active business license each year since then. So we are in compliance with the conditional use permit. The property did change when Dad combined the two properties together. I think it was back in, I can't remember what the date was, but I think that's what they're talking about. It's not in compliance now, but we've maintained our, the conditional use permit as it was given to us since that time. And the only thing we want to do right now is split off the house from the shop property, because we have an offer from a neighbor that wants to buy the house. And I would like to pay off the debt that we incurred when we paid off the reverse mortgage. So we would like to sell the house, and in order to do so, they said we had to follow a rezone procedure, and then a subdivision to subdivide it off of their existing property. So that's our intent, is just to sell the house. It does state in this the documentation from the staff that it was it states adding additional residential uses adjacent to other property will have negative impacts, but we're not adding additional residential uses. It's an existing residential use right now. We've been renting the home since my father passed away, and now we have an opportunity to sell it, so we'd like to sell it and continue to run the business next door. And all of the neighbors in the area, well, the business was there before any of the neighbors were up there, so all the neighbors are really good about the business. It hasn't had any negative impacts on the community. So we'd just like to continue running the business as is and sell the home. Otherwise, we'll have to keep renting it out, and we would like to be able to sell it if possible. So that's our intent.
Commissioners, any questions for the proponent?
Mr. Chair, I do have an update that might be beneficial to the discussion. The reason for the non-compliance with the commercial property is due to the lot change. It was originally approved as a 0.71 acre lot, and its CUPs are tied to a legal description. The larger lot size is the non-compliance. So in fact, creating a future potential 0.71 acre lot would be closer to the original approval of the CUP.
Okay, so it has the potential of being two lots. The one would be the one on there. The other one would need frontage of some sort. So they would have to do like a lane or something up the middle to get a second house back in there?
The two lots would be, one the residential and the other the commercial.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry. Okay,
Not very typical, so takes a little bit of
okay.
adjustment, yep.
Mr. Vabel, is your plan just to basically split the lot in two and run a new east-west boundary through the middle?
No. We have, there is a lane that goes through there, but it goes back to the pasture in the back. But our whole sole purpose is just to sell the home and then operate the business. on the other portion of the property that we, retain.
So you'd be keeping like 5 acres or 4.5 acres.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would split off, somewhere around a half to 3/4 of an acre with the home, and the additional property would be with the business.
Okay.
And then did not mention there is one letter of opposition that's been received.
Thank you.
Commissioners have seen that.
Right, but that letter of opposition seems to be that they don't want any more homes in there, and this wouldn't allow any more homes than are already there. Right? Because it's just
Correct.
separating for the business and the house.
Right, the
Correct.
minimum lot
Was
size is,
there a letter of opposition?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, that doesn't surprise me. Probably one of the lots to the west behind the property.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear from folks here in a minute.
Yeah.
Any other
So with,
questions?
with that, Tim, with that lot with the business, so the business is gonna have roughly 3.5 acres with it.
Correct, yes.
In the future, could there be a home on that lot where there's 2 separate lots? There could be a home there
Sure.
at some point, because there's 2 legal lots, right? Or would there be a restriction where that's a business?
density.
We don't have plans at this time, no.
They're
I didn't,
they're asking staff if it's legally,
I'm sorry,
if it would
okay.
be legally allowed.
You and I have had that discussion.
If we zone it R2, they can definitely put a house on.
But it's not, that's not,
Depending on densities, but
You can't have a house with the business
so they would split
unless
it
it were
again.
rezoned to commercial or, I think it's industrial, I forget now, that would allow caretakers residents to accompany the business.
so that other lot, even though it's gonna be RU2, it's still gonna be deemed commercial under that.
It's gonna be taxed as commercial, and it will continue as a legal non-conforming use. In fact, you probably increase the nonconformity because there's more restrictions in the RU2 zone than there are in the A10 zone in regard to residential protections, right? So there's a little bit of a challenge with, from my viewpoint as staff, in doing an RU2 zone with an already non-conforming business. But it's open for discussion, and that's why we've had that and reached out to the attorney's office to see if there are any long-term issues that come up.
So the only way to have a residence on the property that has the business down the road in the future would be to extinguish the business and then build on the RU2.
Or pursue a rezone of the business to the zone that would allow a caretaker's residence. Then we're just talking about a dwelling unit. It would have to meet those parameters of a caretaker's residence.
In order to maintain the business.
Correctly. No.
So what zoning would allow that?
That's what I can't remember. I have to look up. I didn't prepare this report, so I apologize. I believe it's industrial, if I recall correctly.
Other questions for Mr. Vabel or staff, commissioners? Okay, if you would, by show of hands, how many folks would like to speak on this item tonight?
Bring him up.
Yeah, he's welcome to speak.
Started me on.
That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands, so no one here has any comments on this particular item? Okay, commissioners, what would you like to do? Ready to close the public hearing?
I do have a question. Top of page 3 of the report, it's talking about the restricted portion. Are you talking those 2 parcels that now we're bringing back in? Is that what's the restricted part that's not amended?
Top of page,
Page 3 of your report says, although the parcel may be considered technically legal as no new lots have been created since August of 2008, it is restricted as a portion is located in the High Country subdivision.
oh,
So we're talking those 2 skinny slivers?
correct. So there's some interesting remnant pieces that are somehow attached and associated with that subdivision. And so a rezone would allow the applicant to move forward and propose working with property owners, affected property owners in that subdivision to clean up property lines and lots and take off restrictions.
Is legal ready to tell us their opinion of the non-conforming status now and going forward with what could or may not happen?
So the question put to the attorney's office was, is it possible for a legal non-conforming use to continue if the property is rezoned by the owner? And so the answer to that question, in our opinion, is that, so the definition of non-conforming use says that it means a use of a land that legally existed before the current land use designation. It has been maintained continuously since the time of the land use or ordinance regulation governing the land changed, and because of one or more subsequent land use ordinance changes, does not conform to the regulations that now govern the use of the land. So that last section right there, because of one or more subsequent land use changes, what that says to our office is that it can survive multiple zoning changes over time. It doesn't specify whether those zoning changes happen because the county council just of its own accord decides to rezone an area, or if the applicant, proposes a rezone of his own property. It doesn't specify any difference between those two. So if they meet those other two requirements, that it legally existed before and it's been continuously operated since, then at that point it would be able to survive one or more land use changes.
But not eligible for expansion.
Correct. So if they wanted to expand or make a different change that would address the CUP, they would have to revisit that entire process. But being grandfathered in, you can keep it, but you're sort of trapped. You can't really make any changes.
Right. Okay. Questions for council, commissioners? Okay, would you like to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, commissioners, additional discussion? What are your thoughts? I'll just note the parcel, according to the last map in the packet, is completely surrounded by RU2 zone.
Yeah. Yeah,
I wish it were cleaned up before we had to make this decision.
True. And you don't mean physically cleaned up, you
No.
just mean on paper cleaned up.
Like the being legal, not the
Yeah.
CUP, but
Right.
the lines, the boundaries, and
and really, this almost needs to happen so we can clean those up.
That's right.
Mr. Vabel, is that your intent for those sliver parcels to the north to, work through a process to consolidate those into a legal lot, or what's your plans there?
Well, I thought that was already done. That was the purpose why they were moved together, because the one was located on the north side of the David Christensen lot, which was parcel number 125342. And so there was that sliver that we had a tax notice. We were being taxed on that little sliver over on the north side, as well as the balance of the main balance of the property. And there were two different parcel numbers. And so we just moved that over. We got approval with David Christensen property to just move his lot over to the north to compensate for that sliver. And then we moved that sliver over on the south side so that we could consolidate it into one lot. And they all have the same parcel number now. So I thought that was all squared away. I don't know why it still shows in those three different parcels, because they have the same parcel number.
Is that because he didn't go through a subdivision amendment? Did he just recorded them, or is that why it's non-conforming still?
We don't have a full generational study of what happened up in that area. So it would take a fair amount of time.
Right. I take, though, from your answer, Mr. Vabel, that your intent would be to clean that up.
Correct, yes, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because we thought it was already that cleaned up anyway when we moved them over together to make one lot. And they all, like I said, they all have the same parcel number. So if we could clean that up and clear that up, that'd be great.
What would you like to do? Thoughts?
I'm looking at the pros and the cons, and I don't know, pros are organized, I mean, I don't see the cons with it, I don't know why would not approve it, so that's why.
Could I make just one more comment?
Hang on a second.
Okay.
Well, I was honestly leaning towards the suggestion of the county with denial, but when it was pointed out that the surrounding properties are all RU2, well, not all of them, but many of them are RU2, it would be nice to get it cleaned up and,
On 3 sides.
yeah. But, I know what you're saying, so, yeah.
Melinda?
Yeah, I was with him. I was coming into this leaning toward denial, but hearing it now and hoping that it would get cleaned up with this, I would be fine to go with the rezone, recommend that to council.
Same,
Yeah.
same feelings,
Yeah,
Nathan?
it's not gonna change the neighborhood any out there.
M-
Just gonna be
Mr.
different owner on 2 parcels, so.
Mr. Vabel, you had a final thought?
Yeah, and, you know, it goes along with your thoughts. It's already RU2 all around us, and we're not looking at making any changes to what's existing at this time anyway. The home is there. It has been a single-use dwelling, a single-family dwelling for years and years. The shop has been there in business, you know, since my father put a shop in there in 1975. And so we're not changing anything to the residential area at all, you know, in an adverse, you know, to the, you know, what's existed all this time. So we're not going to make any changes to the neighborhood at all. We're just going to change ownership of the house if possible. That's what we want to do. So.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Vabel, thank you. All right,
Thank you.
staff, what would you like to do on this item?
Just one last question, what, could they develop, if it was rezoned, what's the development potential with that? I mean.
One more lot, they would have to basically
accessible,
extinguish
though?
the lot and the CUP, and then they could
So
build
they'd
a
have
house
to,
on it.
the CUP would have to be dissolved, right?
So
The business.
The conditional use permit, a legal non-conforming use requires continuous use. And so if that use ever stops, that CUP would then be taken.
And then they could do a home on that property.
But at the same time, even if they continue the business, they can't come out of home unless the home is a caretaker's.
But it had to be rezoned first to industrial or commercial, whatever the,
Pretty sure industrial.
which would be very unlikely
It would be an
to be
expansion.
approved, I would think. So,
Yeah,
Okay,
and I don't see it.
what would you like to do, commissioners? Just a reminder, staff did provide optional language for approval if you're leaning that way, for any of you who would like to make a motion.
I'd make a motion that we recommend approval to the county council with those 3 conclusions from the staff.
We have a motion to recommend approval.
I second that.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of recommending approval for the Vabel rezone, the county council, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passed unanimous. All right, Mr. Vabel, I think we can let you go.
sounds good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Okay. Item 3 is the Gershon Ranch item. I'd like to give a staff report for that.
And you see this slide of the property and surrounding context with the correct label at the top, Gershon Ranch rezone. And you're looking at the 33-plus acre property highlighted in red, located at approximately 200 east, 9800 north. And the rezone request is from A10 to RU5. For just a little more of the context, I did not measure the exact distance from the edge of Richmond City, but we could probably have that figure fairly soon in terms of,
About 1,200 feet.
1,200
When I
feet.
get it in there a minute ago.
Okay, thank you. So approximate quarter mile. Does have a rail line between the city and this area. Here's an aerial photo of the property, and you see some single-family residential surrounding and predominantly agriculture. It is, I think, of note that the existing residents are shown here in the dark icon of the little house. These red dots indicate up to 6 homes that could be subdivided into the property based on a rezone to RU5, as well as other buildable homes that are, have potential based on some of the adjacent lots to the east that have been going through parcel line adjustments with the intention for single-family residential development. So this is somewhat of a projected context with black as existing homes, red as potential future. Some within the proposed rezone area and some outside, the 3 outside to the east. So in terms of a staff recommendation, we've mentioned to the applicant that we do not currently have a general plan that provides specific guidance. These are images showing the discussion in the current general, I should say the general plan update process, which has not been adopted and is projected for this summer, late summer for final adoption. And so looking at a continuation of RU2 and RU5 rezones, which do provide an option for cluster development. However, it's not an incentive or a requirement to increase density from A10 to cluster and preserve agricultural land. That is an option available to the applicant if they wish to pursue that upon a rezone approval. The image below shows the potential for cluster development. And so staff's recommendation is for Planning Commission to deliberate and explore either a recommendation of approval with the option available to the applicant to rezone and potentially develop 5-acre lots or a variation of 5-acre lots or apply the cluster development, or to deny and to wait until the new general plan provides more specific rezone guidance. So there have been some letters of opposition, or a letter of opposition and I believe a petition. Here's the one letter of opposition that I believe you've had a chance to look at those. So staff's, I think, also in recent rezones looking that have considered rezoning agricultural property to residential, there's been some interest between Planning Commission and Council to encourage cluster development. And, but those policies are still in the formative stage. So with that, we'd like to turn it over for discussion and happy to respond to any questions.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Commissioners, any questions for staff on this one? Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to disclose that this is my ward boundaries, so I also have business relations with the applicant as well as outside the applicant, so I've relayed that to staff. And where I don't have any vested interest in the property or the proceeds from it, they said that proceed. Is that good with you, or?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Brady.
Tim, would they have to put in a road, a private road or a county road to access those 6 lots going through there? Because they don't have the frontage up front, of course, for 6 lots.
My understanding is a private road would be required to service up to 5 homes. 6 homes would trigger a public road and pavement, yeah.
To be a public road, or what are the criteria for that?
Once you exceed 5 homes, then a public road standard of 66-foot right-of-way and 20-ish feet of pavement and shoulders aside, whereas a private road is a 33-foot.
Or
Private road is not required to be paved.
So the way they could get around that is to the first lot to be along the road up there, and then the other 5 to be on a private road?
That's a good question. I believe just the subdivision, what, is it access or number of units in the subdivision? It'd be access from the road, I believe.
Yeah, I think there are ways to get around the public road requirement. And they've reviewed and are aware of some of those options. They've considered those.
Okay.
Tim, can you remind me on like that cluster development that you showed, where the houses are clustered together and then you have the open space in the middle? Who's maintaining that big open space in the middle?
There are options. It could be owned by one of the lot owners as agricultural remainder that's associated with one owner. It could be commonly owned. It could be leased to another operator. There are several ways to think about how agricultural remainders remain viable.
It would just have something on the land that it could not be further subdivided.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, we don't-
Other questions for staff? Nathan? Okay. Would you like to open the public hearing, commissioners?
I'll make that motion. Public hearing?
Okay, we have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, is the applicant or applicant representative here this evening for the Jershon Ranch rezone? Yes, would you like to come up and speak to the commission? Not a requirement, but most do. State your name for us, please.
Mark Cardell. My wife Gretchen and I are owners of the Jershon Ranch LLC that you see the 33 acres on.
Anything you would like to tell the commission based on what you've heard or seen in the staff report?
Well, we've ran through this quite a bit in the zoning office. This has probably been in the works for 2 years, and not particular this plan, but changing plans because of things that were implemented, and we had to do a lot of changing. But I think one of the main reasons for rezoning is because the way the world is, we have family that are interested, and our children are getting close to wanting a piece of land, and where we're at, the county requires that it be paved in order to build, and we can't afford to have them put that pavement in all the way down to where they can access power and water. So this is a great alternative for that, and with the private roads that are coming in there, it can access the power and the water that we have on the place. And I think also seeing the need for people that are needing homes, we've decided to try to accommodate some of those people that are coming in and provide opportunity for them to come in and build their homes. We've worked with the zoning office. Like I say, we've probably redrawn this multiple times, trying to comply with all the ordinances and codes and everything, and this is what we've come up with. And looking at the 6 homes that are down there, 4 of them sit on 5 acres or less. So I think it fits well into the neighborhood there in rezoning for 5 acres.
Okay. Questions for the applicant, commissioners? Okay, thank you.
All right.
Are there other folks here this evening that would like to speak on this item? Yeah, feel free to come on up. State your name.
My name's Alan Lauer, and I am the present owner of Lauer Foods in Richmond. We have an agricultural business, and we're in the meat business, You know, and I'm third generation in the meat business, and my son here's the fourth, and we're raising Gen 5. My experience in the meat business has found that when the town grows in around the business, you're forced to leave. And knowing that, most of the profits of our business has been going into buying the land around us to have a buffer. And I have acquired 800 acres of land, the closest land in the city limits. I own that. It'll never be developed. But I have a big footprint there and a big buffer. And homes and people complaining are not compatible with what I do, as well as Mark Woodward, the owner of Wrightwood Eggs. He has a big footprint right in that neighborhood, going right down that road. He's running chicken manure trucks, and he'll come up and talk about it. But the old school farmers will tell you that piece of property in that area, they call it Pond Town. And the reason that it was sold is because it's not farmable, it's a swamp. And people who have been sold those type of properties in other areas of the valley, it's a nightmare to them because no one knows about that on the outside. But all of us here that are, you know, old school residents, we know that. But we have put a lot into our community as a taxpayer in the county. You know, I paid, between my personal property tax and the tax on my building and business, I paid $300,000 this year. And so I employ 200 people. I provide health care for my employees. I have an on-site clinic. We're have a new clinic. We're about to have it ready to go. But we are an asset to the community, and we're doing the best that we can. But this will be a detriment to me and my business and my family.
Thank you. Other folks like to comment?
My name is Mark Woodward. I'm one of the owners of Wrightwood, and like Alan said, we have interest in this particular action. We own property to the west of that, and we're not completely impacted by this, but we have trucks and farm equipment that drive by this every day. In the past, we have worked with all the homeowners in the area to try to develop a plan to make sure that what we are doing is okay with them. When you talk about something like this going in that is not unreasonable to agriculture, the rezoning may not be unreasonable, but the actions of this, what happens down the road, are absolutely unreasonable. My family has been targeted in the past in a different area, and not because what we were doing was incompatible but with the laws or the zoning, but what we were doing was incompatible with all the people that moved in and decided that we need to move out. And so we were forced, because of the rezoning around us, to move our business, and that was not an inexpensive thing. We've spent millions of dollars trying to do things that would be friendly to the neighborhoods and the surrounding areas, and we feel like we are reasonable with what we're doing. When we start opening, rezoning up like this in an area that is as agricultural as this is, it becomes a slippery slope to more development and forcing out the agriculture that's in the area. And so based on that, we're opposed to this action. Thanks.
Thank you.
For Mark? Mark? What would you foresee the possible problems with the development directly affecting your ag business?
Well, like Alan said, we compost chicken manure. We have trucks that drive along the road. I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but quite often, hauling raw chicken manure, and that is not the best smelling item that you can imagine. We also occasionally, not very often, but occasionally we have complaints about smell, whether it's from our compost site or not. I'm not going to comment. I really am not 100% sure that it is or that it isn't. But the smells and possible problems with flies as well. We're a mile and a half away from this, which you would think is a good buffer. Is it? I don't know.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak on this item tonight? Yeah, come on up, please.
So my name's Andrew Snar. I live in the 10-acre parcel that's next to the tracks. There's a 10-acre parcel between the 33 acres and mine on the road. That's where we're at. And so just looking at it from our perspective, we're a 10-acre parcel. The one next to us and next to the property in question is a 10-acre parcel. The one behind us is a 10-acre parcel, and then there's another 10-acre parcel next to the south side of the 33 acres. So where it's already Ag 10, and we obviously wouldn't mind more 10-acre lots. That's kind of what we're seeing. The other concern we have is the more homes you put in, the more water you have to drill for. Is that going to affect all the existing properties, the wells that they're on? Those are our concerns, and I don't have the answers for that, but those are just the concerns that we have in general.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come on up.
I'm Vern Fielding with Parker Real Estate, and just for disclosure, I'm one of the listing agents helping the Cardalls sell their property. But just a couple of observations, and I very much respect Mr. Lauer, Mr. Woodward, and agree with them on their impact in the communities. They are good neighbors. I've sat on the Planning Commission in Richmond City and advocated for them in some of Mr. Lauer and some of his developments as his business has grown. And yet at the same time, in advocating for my clients, I would point out, like was stated, that this is contiguous. It is consistent with 4 out of the 6 neighboring parcels are less than 5 acres. I would also say, I was before this body a couple of years ago talking about a 45-acre parcel in Smithfield, and some of these same concerns were pointed out then, that we want agriculture, we want larger lots, and because of the contiguousness of that parcel, those same neighbors that opposed a rezone to an RU5, it was at that point denied, but now since then that property is now part of Smithfield City, and instead of 5-acre lots, there's 300 homes going into that same piece of ground. And so an RU5 does protect somewhat the nature of this property and prevents perhaps even higher density in the future. So again, I would just speak and advocate in favor of property rights. Those that want to buy this property have an opportunity like they've been doing elsewhere, and it's consistent, so I'd advocate for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments tonight? Please come on up.
My name's Troy Hatch, property owner on the small, almost 3-acre parcel that borders this piece of property. We've got a couple concerns similar to Andrew's. One being the water. There's a few people who have their wells run dry almost every year there. If we're drilling more wells, double the amount that we anticipated, is that going to affect all the existing water and issues that we have there? We don't know the answer. I'm sure that that can be found. I don't know though. The other concern I have and why I oppose it is because we went through with the Cardalls, who are good friends of ours, and this isn't anything personal, and they're great neighbors, but we went through and with them negotiated terms to be able to move boundary lines and give access to electricity and roads and everything else, and that was at the A10 based on those. There would be 3 homes going in behind us instead of 6, and so we opposed that because we're big fans of people being able to do what they want with their property, but we don't want double the amount of homes back there than we anticipated and what we had originally agreed on upon that basis. So,
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other thoughts tonight? Any other comments from the audience? Okay, commissioners? Someone want to close the public hearing?
That motion?
I'll
May-
second. Oh,
I just had one question for the applicant, though. Well, I actually had 2 questions for staff. So, one for this applicant, one for staff. So,
Can we let
Hold
the
them to
motion to
we can close
close?
it, yeah,
Is that okay?
'cause he can still
All right,
come in
so we got a
and
motion and a second to
Yeah.
close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, go ahead, Brady, sorry.
So my question is, do we still have the, we've already identified it's gonna be a private road that services this, but do we still have the ordinance enforced that you can only have a private road be a maximum of 500 feet?
So that's a good question, and as to whether it's going to be a public or private road, that's not determined, right? Their options are there. It can be public, it can be private, it can be anything. I believe that the limitation is still there for that distance, but it's been treated very much specific to the context. So if it makes sense to allow it, if it's going to help with flow or getting people where they need to go, it would likely be approved. If it would create a hazard or a safety issue, then it would likely not be approved. If that hasn't specifically been addressed for this specific item at the
Well,
rezone
I
level.
recognize it's not relative to the decision tonight, but my reason in answering that, and I don't know distances, but if there was still an ordinance for 500 feet, and depending upon the layout, if a private road was to exceed, my little computer, I can't even run any measurements here, but if it was to exceed 500 feet, it's not gonna happen anyway, if we
So
still have that ordinance.
It's currently there, it's still there. It says terminal road shall not be longer than 500 feet from the center line of the adjoining road to the center of the cul-de-sac.
So with your potential, can you run a measurement from the center of that 9800 north in and give us an idea where 500 feet is?
I could do that. I will mention that there is possibility of more than one private road, given the potential 2 access points.
But they're all coming from the north going south, right? So max you could be is 500 on either one of those axes.
Unless there's other,
There's extenuating circumstances. I wouldn't use that to make a decision or.
Well,
I don't know if that's
know.
gonna help
It's
you.
just-
It's essentially the length of that existing lot with the home next to it.
Is about 450.
Yeah.
That's 450 on the west.
To the corner.
Like, is this what you're talking about? Is this what you wanted measured?
That's 450, perfect.
It's about
Okay.
450 to the back of the homes.
But that could be the road, and then they could have driveways off of it.
Okay, other questions
Yeah, and there's a lot of different options.
for staff, commissioners?
As far as the agricultural uses in the surrounding area, I grew up farming around there. Mr. Woodward's concern is legit. We own property surrounding Woodward's property, and the composting facility, despite what he says, it's odorous. I mean, there's a lot that goes on with that composting facility. There's a reason why it's out there away from everything. We have a large reservoir across the street. It's not the most, on a cool day, you don't want to be downwind of it. That being said, it doesn't take much to get the wind going eastbound, and 1.5 miles not far. That and the flies. I'm just concerned about the impact of that on the agricultural side of it.
I might just add, I think it's been clear in the hearing that this is not about homes versus not homes, it's about 2 to 3 homes versus 5 to 6. It's kind of the difference here.
And I think to that, I mean, I see those points. I mean, where I was, in Young Ward, we used to have 15 or 20 dairies, and now we have 1. As development has come out there, and it continues to grow. And to think that because there's an entity there, an ag entity, that smells to some people bad, to some people not so bad. And I love to drive down 10th West and smell Jensen's silage when they're feeding cows, mixed with a little manure, just because it brings back memories of 45 years living out here. But to think we're gonna not make any changes in that whole west of Richmond area, for that, I think as a property right side of it is hard to make that call. So if we make that call on this parcel, we're kind of making that call on every other parcel west of Richmond, which is a pretty large property impact to a lot of different property owners. Some, like Mr. Lauer, don't want, I mean, they're never gonna develop. They have that right, they own the property, they can do that. But for all those others, you know, what is there, you know, I don't know how many different property owners out there. I think that's a hard line to take.
But on the flip side, I see your point. On the flip side, I see what we did when the proposal was made for Logan City to do their composting facility, and we didn't approve it because of those same problems we're addressing right now, the smell, everything else that goes along with it. This is a municipality trying to do that, yet, you know, that's a reason why it was denied, I feel.
But you were denying what was creating the smell, the bad smell?
Yeah, we didn't allow it to take place in Benson because of that, because of the effect of the surrounding
That were already there.
the surrounding development.
I know, and this, I guess I feel like if someone, you know, builds here, they have to know what's already there, but it doesn't matter, they still complain. I work at a city office, and yeah, I mean, they still complain, even though that use was there first.
Can I say something?
Hang on. Because we've closed the public hearing, we're not gonna accept any additional comments from the audience at this time. So let's just finish our discussion, commissioners. Any other thoughts or comments? What would you like to do? I can't make a motion, so somebody else has to do it.
I would make a recommendation based on staff's conclusions for approval, based on their 1 conclusion and 3 sub-conclusions, I guess they are there.
So we have a motion to recommend approval. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the Gershon Ranch rezone based on the conclusion for recommendation of approval. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna abstain.
Okay. Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So we have 2 opposed and 2 for, and so that means the motion does not pass, and with 1 abstention.
You're not voting?
That's right. Am I correct about that?
Say that again?
I said we have two votes in favor and 2 votes against and 1 abstention. So with the 2 and 2, I believe that means that the item does not pass.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So does it, but it goes on to city council as just
It's
2
only
to 2.
recommendation.
Sorry, county council is just a 2 to 2 recommendation.
It can either go on to the county council with the recommendation that's been given that failed, or you can have another motion that's made and a different vote taken to see if there's some other ideas out there that might have a quorum behind them.
Anybody have any bright ideas? Should we let this move along?
I think we'll let it move along.
I think that makes sense. Okay. Take your chances with the county council. There's our recommendation that did not pass. So good luck with the council. Just so everyone knows, this goes to council, and they can make a decision to approve or deny the recommendation for the rezone. Okay. All right.
Hey, one thing that we didn't recognize in that, and I don't know if it's important, Did the audience know about the letters?
I did mention letters of opposition and a petition.
Thanks, Brady.
A letter and a petition.
So we have item number 4. Looks familiar. The Holyoke Airport, CUP. Staff, do we have a
Yes. staff
report?
Report there. Pull that up. Thanks for waiting.
I think on that last item, commissioners, I mean, we could have had somebody make a motion to deny it, and we could have had the same vote. I think, my sense was it was gonna be the same.
That's why I didn't
And so,
create a motion.
yeah,
So
okay.
I didn't think we'd get a different outcome than where we were at.
That's
If we
what
could've got a different
I
outcome.
thought too, but I wanted to make sure that nobody felt like I cut us off a little too soon or
No, and
anything
I
like
think it's
that.
fair to say to the city council, like, it could have gone either way. There are pretty strong feelings both ways.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I feel like resigning.
When it hits home, when it's in your backyard, that's
Oh,
when you're like,
man.
I'm out, yeah.
I've got just a general kind of overview. We've been through a lot of details on this, I think, over the last months. I think we started this last year, towards the end, in the fall, end of the year. What this reflects is just kind of a summary to kind of clarify what's happening. We've been in the weeds a lot with the details, and so this is bringing us back to what the commission's really discussing, specific to considering revoking the permit, conditional use permit. So I'm going to go through some of these specifics. If there's questions, pause or stop me along the way. I think the applicant has also, or it looks like their attorney has got some information also prepared in response to the staff memorandum. There was an update provided to that based on some clarification on the part of the applicant or the CUP holder. And that's been forwarded to you and also to the applicant today to confirm those details. It did not change the recommendation from staff or the concern from staff. But as we go through this, let's go ahead and touch on these pieces. The summary, first of all, what initiated the review. The original conditional use permit identifies under condition 8 a requirement that if any structures are built within the noted runway areas and zones, that conditional use permit must be reconsidered by the Cache County Land Use Authority. And number 2 is there was a structure, a single-family dwelling that was built in one of those zones, specifically the runway protection zone that exists on the south end, across the street from the runway on the property directly south. So the next question is, what effect does the construction of that dwelling have on that Holyoke Airport conditional use permit? Well, now it's back to the commission to be reconsidered. As staff looked at that, staff identified that because the CUP can no longer meet the conditions of approval, that's item B there, it may be revoked. There's a condition that exists that allows you to consider revoking the permit. It doesn't say you must, it says you may. So it's up to you to use your discretion to see if there's sufficient reason to revoke. When we look at that under item B, 1 and 2, if it's revoked, the use must cease, and there's no guarantee it would be reapproved if they, say, reapply for a permit again. And number 2, if the permit is not revoked, the use may continue under the existing conditions and approval, although it creates some issues. So we're going to talk about that. Number 3, what conditions exist that allow the commission to consider an act to revoke the approved conditional use permit? Staff has identified that condition 1 of the conditional use permit specifies that the proponent must meet all applicable standards of the Cache County Code. Within that requirement, you have the specific use type for a private airport. It requires they apply all the criteria adopted under that advisory circular 1500, I forgot all the numbers attached to it, that set up the requirements for runway design. What we've identified as staff is that the placement of the structure on the property to the south of the conditional use permit and the location of other existing structures on properties that surround it, it's not possible for the conditional use permit to continue and still be in compliance with county code and the conditions of the CUP approval. And it also creates a safety hazard for adjoining property owners because of those RUPZ zones or areas. What possibilities exist that can allow the existing CUP to remain compliant with the CUP conditions of approval and code requirements? Something that's been discussed over the last several meetings has been some of those options that have been proposed. Maybe if there were certain approaches taken or restrictions placed on how you land or take off, that safety concern can be mitigated. What staff has identified that is an issue, well, let me continue with that. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Those were identified as option 1 in the previous meetings and documents. And it really was focused on keeping all that air traffic to the west of the runway as you approach the airport, whether for landing or for takeoff, so that it would reduce the risk on adjoining property owners. And the hope and the intent would be to change the impact or effect of the runway protection zones or the runway design requirements to no longer affect or impact that, specifically that home to the south of the runway, directly across the street. Mrs. Holyoke also sent us an email reporting that she'd filed paperwork with the FAA to make some of those changes to her airport master record, which is what some of the any other pilots might see or refer to as that's adopted. If that's adopted by the FAA, it would restrict or indicate a preference for, I'm uncertain what the distinction would be there. Maybe there's some clarification Ms. Holyoke can add, or maybe we're reliant upon the FAA to set that requirement. But it would specify that landing would be with the left-hand traffic pattern on runway 36. So if you're coming into the property to land, you'd come from the south, and you would land with the left turn pattern on the runway headed north. That makes sense. Takeoff would be a right-hand traffic pattern on runway 18, south facing. So whenever you're going to take off, it would be to the south and immediately to the right. That keeps that runway protection zone from affecting, well, the perception is, the hope is that would change the runway protection zone or shift it, at least from previous discussion with the applicant, to the west, and thereby take that home outside of that runway protection zone and help it be compliant with the county code and the conditions of approval. So the next question would be, well, how does that proposal to restrict the traffic pattern affect the underlying runway areas and zones, and specifically that runway protection zone? Staff agrees that the adjustment of the traffic pattern appears to reduce the safety hazard that might be attached to that. And that the runway approach surface, which is above ground, after you take off, that's where the runway approach surface exists, may be offset. So that runway approach zone can be shifted from what the center line of the runway is. And that can be shifted to help avoid obstacles. The challenge is that staff has identified that adjustment of the traffic pattern, while it can affect the runway approach surface, it does not affect the runway protection zone on the ground. And that becomes really clear when you talk about what the distinction between those two pieces are. So the runway approach zone, or approach surface, The purpose of that is to protect the use of the runway. That is its primary focus. However, the purpose of the runway protection zone is to enhance the protection of people and property on the ground, which is why that is, for staff, has a much weightier application because we deal with land use on the ground. We don't deal with action or flight paths in the air, but we do have some input or direction on what happens on the ground. And if the intent of the runway protection zone is to protect protect people and property on the ground, that would be of most importance and where we have authority to say what happens. The challenge is that when you shift the approach surface, it doesn't shift the runway protection zone. That stays where it's at. So just by shifting the approach surface in the air, it doesn't shift the approach zone or the runway protection zone on the ground. That's based on the center line of the runway. And it's specific to that to protect if something goes wrong, that there's protection for those people or property on the ground if something doesn't work out properly. The other note here is a standard traffic pattern for pilots or for operation of aircraft is a left-hand traffic pattern. That has to do with the fact that it's for specific propeller planes, propeller-driven planes, it's easier to turn left than it is to turn right. So that's why that's, from my understanding, the standard pattern is a left-hand pattern. If ever you're going to have a runway that has a right-hand pattern, you have to let people know because that's not typical. That's non-standard. And so that also raises a question in staff's mind. If you're going to restrict the pattern to be right-hand only, that's why it has to have a specific thing on the airport master record to direct where that pattern has to be. Based on the requirements of the county land use code, you can see staff's recommendation there. The real issue becomes that I don't see how the runway can operate and still comply with the county code and conditions of approval. So let's say that you don't revoke the permit, there's still an issue that they can't comply with county code because that structure is still in the runway protection zone, which says it can't be, which means if we look at condition 8, it has to come back to the commission for review. So the question for me is, how can the runway continue to operate if there's always going to be a home in that runway protection zone when our code says it shouldn't be there? And the condition also says it needs to be reviewed by the commission to address that conflict or that safety issue. That's why you see a recommendation from staff for revoking the permit, because it doesn't appear possible to bypass the code requirement in any sense. I just talked you through the whole thing. If there are specific questions about what that looks like, we can pull up the old references. And I know that the applicant also has some things. I haven't reviewed this. I'm not aware of what that states. But happy to address questions there as needed. But that's staff's concern. Runway protection zone doesn't change. Can't comply with code. It seems clear that it would need to be revoked.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Nolan.
So we're here and we're listening to the Holyoke's concern. I hope we also listen to the person who has the house in the RPZ, what their feeling of safety is as well. I mean, to me, there's two issues here, two concerns, that we address what the Holyokes have or what's going to be taken away, but we also consider what that home is facing, who's built there. I would say they have rights because they're in the runway zone in the RPZ, so I'm sure they view it as a safety thing as well.
Questions for staff, commissioners? Okay, what would you like to do on this item? Would you like to hear from the CUP holder, their counsel? It's at your discretion.
Just out of curiosity, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
is either of you here on behalf of the airport? I recognize them guys, sorry.
Okay.
Are you the homeowner?
No, I'm
Okay.
the homeowner's mother.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind hearing from them, where they have all this stuff they just handed in, maybe give us some explanation of it.
Okay.
We haven't had time to read through it, so.
Is that okay
I
with
would
you
also
guys?
propose that we
Absolutely.
allow the representation of the homeowner to speak as well.
Yep, I think we'll do both. Does that sound good?
A little time.
Mr. Chambers, how much time would you like?
10 minutes, I'll try and be as fast.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable, commissioners? Okay, thank you.
Joe Chambers, I represent the Holyoaks, and I apologize, but we received a copy of the staff recommendation Friday, May 27th at 5:42, 5:47, or 4:47. It was late. And as a result, I've only had 2 days to read their report. And so I prepared a response because I thought that there were several concerns in the staff's report that I think they got it wrong. So let me just make a couple of points. The FAA advisory circular provides for multiple options. There's not just one way to design a landing strip or an airport. And that circular consists of over 300 pages, about 380, I think. And one of the things that we've tried to stress to the staff is we've suggested that they contact the FAA and involve a member of the staff, of the county staff, the Holyoaks and the FAA, so that there was a dialogue, because due to the complexity of the circular, we think that the way the ordinance is written by Cache County, it incorporates the circular as the applicable standard. And the county is interpreting it one way, but with all due respect to the county land use staff, I don't think they're trained or educated in aeronautics or FAA or airport design matters. And that circular, as we attempted to show you with the presentation back in March, there are areas that do not have a runway protection zone at all. They're usually in larger cities. And had the county enacted an ordinance, which is under consideration the next item on the agenda, saying you have to own that runway protection zone and you have to have a runway protection zone, the circular doesn't always provide that. And the staff is saying that their interpretation of the FAA circular is that you have to have a runway protection zone. Now, you can say it makes sense for safety issues, but the bottom line is what the legislative body of this county enacted was an ordinance that incorporates the advisory circular. And those are the applicable standards that you have to have. The CUP that was granted to the Holyoaks actually gave them 4 options to use that landing strip: taking off north, taking off south, landing north, landing south. And the presentation that we provided showed that the safety concerns, which condition 8 basically is a safety concern, that the potential safety concerns can be completely solved with simply having the takeoffs on runway 18 to a right turn only and the landing on 36. And 18 and 36 are the same landing strip, it's just what direction you're coming from. So because of that, I took a look at this, and in my opinion, the solution that the Holyoaks have fully complies with the Cache County ordinance, the land use code, because by incorporating into chapter 1707-030 and then item 5810, private airport, where they mandate that the design criteria is the FAA advisory circular, you have several options to design that to meet the safety needs. And in this particular case, Condition 8 says that if structures are built within the protection zone, the CPUB must be reconsidered, and we acknowledge that. We've never disputed that. But if condition 8 is there for a safety issue, then you can adopt what the Holyoaks have said to completely resolve that safety issue, because there won't be any takeoffs to the south or to the north, or landings that would affect that home. The conclusion that staff arrived at in point 3A1, we believe is incorrect. They state that with the placement of the structure on the property on the south and the location of other existing structures on the east, north, and west, it's not possible to comply with the county code. And that's my point, is the county code incorporates the design standards of the FAA advisory circular, and you can comply with the county code because you can design a landing strip that meets the county code. We think that the recommendation of staff actually violates Section 1727A 506 of the Utah Code. And that is the provision that this body is very familiar with on granting conditional use permits. And it provides, and the legislature, when they adopted this, they adopted as a matter of express public policy for the state of Utah that when a land use authority is considering the uses of a person's private property, that the private property owner has a legal right under Utah law and is entitled to use that property so long as reasonable conditions can be imposed that would mitigate the anticipated detrimental effect of the proposed use in accordance with the applicable standards. And I point out two important points on that. First, to allow the conditional use, the law does not require the elimination of any of those detrimental effects. It indicates that you mitigate those. And the second point is, state law requires that the conditions be imposed in accordance with the applicable standard. Well, the standard adopted by the Cache County Council is the FAA Advisory Circular, and Holyoke Solution complies with that standard. Holyoke submit the staff's recommendation adopts an approach which is contrary to the applicable standard in the sense that they are trying to eliminate any and all detrimental effects, and that position is inconsistent with and violates the state law. So our recommendation, and let me just indicate, because there's been some debate about reconsider, the term reconsider is defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as to consider something again. And the reason I use the Merriam-Webster dictionary is chapter 1707.020 subparagraph A. The Cache County Commission, when they adopted the ordinance, mandated that if any words or phrases are not defined in the ordinance, then you apply the usual and ordinary meanings of those words as per the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Our recommendation is that you not revoke the permit, but instead adopt a condition that requires the landing and takeoffs to occur as we've indicated. And I mean no disrespect to Chris, but he uses the word substandard or non-standard, and those are not the correct terms. The reason why you usually make a left-hand turn has nothing to do with the aeronautics of the airplane. It has to do with the vision out of the plane. That you don't overlook the passenger side, you look over your side. That's why it's more common for a left hand to occur in an airplane, just like you would in a car. It's easier to make a left-hand turn in a car than it is a right. But it doesn't mean that it can't be done and that it can't be done safely. And lastly, I just want to indicate that the process that you're using, I'm a little bit confused on, because on the back of your agenda, it gives the public some ideas to the actions that you take, legislative or administrative. And this is obviously not a legislative action, but the revocation of a CUP seems to me to be more of a quasi-adjudicative action than an administrative action. And I mention that simply because the process is very frustrating for me as an attorney, because your staff has the ability to feed information to you. And this is more of a complaint to the process, not on the Holyoaks, but the process in general. I had this response prepared and ready to hand out to you at 5:30. And Mrs. Holyoke came over here to give it, but she was told by Chris that she couldn't do it until now. And I don't know if you would have had time to read it, but it seems to me that a lot of the information that we give to staff gets filtered through them. They make a recommendation that's adverse to us. We obviously, because a CUP is a property right, and I appreciate you allowing us to talk, because I think given the concepts of due process and having a meaningful dialogue on it before you vote, requires that I think we have equal access. Chris is sort of like a prosecutor, and we're the defendants on this. And it's an odd relationship to read on the back of your agenda that this is an administrative action when you're really taking a quasi-judicial, making a quasi-judicial decision. If you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. I wish Mr. Parker would have been here, not because I think he's voting in favor of it. I have no idea of what his position is on it, but I do know that he flies and is aware of a lot of the matters, and what pilots do and how this affects that. I'm not, because I'm not a pilot, but I've learned a lot trying to get ready for this. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Chambers?
I just have one. So the proposed new flying pattern and elimination really of the runway protection zone, that has not been approved with FFA yet? FAA or?
They said they were going to have a decision by May 18th at the earliest and July 1st. But given the amount of use of that landing strip, that is what the use of it is per the landowner's directions. So whether or not, what FAA will do is update their master records so that all pilots are aware of that in case they want to use it.
If they agree with that approach, or they could deny it. I mean, I've never certainly sent anything to them, so I don't know how the process works, but I assume if they denied that, then it would be, we'd be back to the same point, right?
We could be.
Well, staff's argument would be whatever they approve. The FAA does not change the RPZ. They don't have that ability. All they're doing is updating the airport master record to indicate how that runway should be used for landing and takeoff.
Well,
is that correct?
I think that's wrong, Chris, because I think on page 23 of the presentation we gave back in March, we made it very clear that the circular is silent on how to adjust the RPZ when an approach or departure surface is modified or restricted. And that's exactly why we've suggested, get the FAA on the line. They would go ahead and tell us what we need to do to be in compliance with their requirements.
I'd like to address some of the points that were raised. I didn't get to do that last time, and I think we missed out on some important communication that needs to happen about the fact that staff has contacted FAA a long time ago. That's in all your information that's been provided. I don't think that they agreed with the response or who I contacted or what was said. And that's different than saying that they weren't contacted. So let's get some clarification on what's actually occurred.
Well, and
So I think it'd be helpful to be able to address some of the points that were raised that I think we really have disagreement on, so the commission's aware of what those disagreements are.
We need to let one of them finish before the other.
Yeah, that's fine, that's
I
fine.
think that, however
Any-
you want to approach
any
that, I
other
think that would be helpful.
Questions for Mr. Chambers? Commissioners,
let me
right
just
now?
indicate that in my written thing, I indicated that if they've reached out to the FAA, it has not been with regards to the Holyoaks being in that dialogue. And based on 40-some years of being an attorney, I know that an answer that you get is often changed by the question that you ask. And that's why I'm suggesting that in order for the staff to make a intelligent, qualified recommendation to this body, there really ought to be a dialogue with the Holyoaks, the FAA, and a staff member as to what all the options are. They only control the air. These guys control the land, but there's an overlap, as in a Venn diagram, when you design the airport. And like I say, the staff takes the position that a runway protection zone is always required. I think that question could be clarified very easily with the FAA, because you couldn't land at the former John Wayne Airport in Burbank, which I recently landed at, if they had to have a runway protection zone. There is none.
Okay, thank you,
I have
Mr.
one
Chambers.
question for Mr.
Go
Chambers.
ahead, go ahead.
How would the revocation of this CUP affect Ms. Holyoke
Well,
and the flight? I mean, more specifically, how many flights are going in and out of there now?
very few, very few. What has happened, though, is when they purchased the property, there was a hangar there, and the property was used by the previous owner for landing and takeoff. And when the Holyoaks came into me, I told them that, to me, I thought they should try to establish a legal non-conforming use that existed at the time they purchased the property, and they didn't need a conditional use permit. And they told me that they would like to apply for a conditional use permit and just not have any question about it and be in compliance. And so that's why they went ahead and over the years, and it took a year and a half, I think, to process the FAA and get this. And now that they have it, they would like to keep it and do it safely. They want to be responsible. And you know, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
One last question. Even with the revocation, she still would be able to fly in that area just on her own, correct?
Well, if you take a look at footnote 1 of what I said on page 1, if you go down to the very, very bottom of that, it says permitting is not required for temporary or intermittent airports as defined by the FAA under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which means if they wanted to fly out there once, twice a month, they wouldn't even need it. But that's not, you know, what they do is they want to be in compliance with the law, but they don't want to see it revoked based on misinformation.
Okay. Other questions or Mr. Chambers? Okay.
Were you going to correct me on something?
Can I just
If I stated something wrong,
I'll just add one thing. So I'm Rachel Holyoke. I am one of the CUP holders with my husband. And to your question of what impact it would be, today, we are not doing much, as Joe stated. He stated that correctly. There is potential that we would like to get an aircraft that would meet the requirements on a more frequent basis, because how often you land and how long it takes, the distance depends on the weather and how heavy you are and all those things. So we anticipate our use may increase. I'm not saying it won't, but it may. And then I do have neighbors who call the FAA every time. And so while the county code would allow us to land, we
don't want this to be something that our neighbors continually call and say they're landing again, and we have to adjudicate how many times and those kinds of things. So this is a non-conforming use. We are simply trying to say this is above board. That's what our neighbors asked us to do. Get it approved. That's where it's been. Certainly there are other options if you were to revoke, that we could land a given number of times in a given period. But it's a matter of, you know, do we have to have the sheriff out there every time? Do we have to go to the FAA every time? And this is one that we would rather just have it be very clearly a use that is permitted, rather than have to get into that discussion every time. So that's the only thing I would add.
Thank you. Okay, would you like to have any comments tonight?
My name is Laura Barris, and we are adjacent, right next to the property where the runway protection zone is, and I'm the mother of Brittany Rupert. She just was not able to attend tonight, and I did not come prepared, and I get super nervous getting up here, and my thoughts are not going to be well organized, but I feel like I need to at least represent, yes, that they are very concerned. And you know, the comment that, you know, it's the staff against them and they don't have the opportunity to really speak. Well, I feel like we're at even a more disadvantage because we don't have, you know, attorney counsel, and we don't have loads of information to present. So I'm just going to, you know, I sent a quick text to my daughter saying, hey, they suggest that I might be, you know, want to speak. And so she replied, and if I'd like to read what she said, if that's okay. And also I want to be sure to have the opportunity to at least show a little video clip of the fact that it really is a safety hazard. And there was we got a video of an airplane that was, you know, I don't know whether they were just, I don't know if they ever land there, but it buzzed the house, and it is a big concern to the fact that people, children, grandchildren live there, and there was a video that you could see of an airplane. I don't know whether they were just trying to harass them or what, but it just buzzed. And I just happened to be in the driveway when this airplane went by, so it is definitely a safety hazard. And I can't, you know, it seems to me just, and the reason they couldn't be here is they feel like that the, you know, that the code should prevail, that it's not a matter of opinion as to whether they should be allowed to land there or not. It's just the code should prevail. The code should prevail. It's like, so this is actually, okay, let's see. I have two things quickly to read here. Okay, again, they want to emphasize that the code is not being followed and that they too have property rights. It impacts their property value, their liability, their safety. This is zoned as residential before there was an airport. The Holyoke said the home would take priority, which means they, the Ruperts, shouldn't have to take the liability, the property value cut, etc. And then they referred to a Michigan case where it is such a liability to have an airport on their land that there is a law where the government has to purchase the land from the homeowners. There have been multiple cases won, and this is a private airport, not a public one, so no benefit outweighs the risk. You know, no benefit to the public outweighs the risk. Let's see, and then a letter that had been sent to the staff. This says, during the last council meeting, March 3rd, 22, an abundance of information was presented to the council in favor of the Holyoke Airport, much of which was irrelevant to this particular case. I would like to write this letter to the council and staff to remind them of the information that is relevant to this particular case. When the original conditional use permit for the Holyoke Airport was set up, the owner said they would quote, prioritize structures. During the last meeting, it was argued that my home could remain in the runway protection zone and still fulfill the requirements of the original conditional use permit by stating that precedence has already been set for homes to be in the runway protection zones. I hope this is making sense. However, the examples cited of homes in the runway protection zones were all examples of public use airports where it was determined that the benefit to the community outweighed the risks. In the case of the Holyoke Airport, there is no public benefit that should outweigh the risks associated with my home being in the runway protection zone of a private airport. In fact, having a home in a runway protection zone is such a liability that with a quick Google search, I found that in Michigan, there's a part of a law, MLC 213.54, that allows property owners to demand that the government purchase their entire property if they establish that the practical value or utility of the property has been destroyed by having their home in an RPZ. There have been multiple cases won in regards to this law. In addition, in regards to this particular airport, the precedent has been set to remove homes from the runway protection zone. There was not a home on the property to the north when the conditional use permit was being established. During the process of obtaining the conditional use permit, a home was built on the north lot. So this is referring to previous home that had been built. And the runway was shortened to remove the home from the runway protection zone to finalize obtaining this conditional use permit. Therefore, for this particular CUP, homes are not compatible with RPZs. Furthermore, it was argued in favor of the airport that airplanes have been landing on the property since 2006. I would like to point out the land has been zoned for residential 6 years prior to that, since 2000. So while there has not been a home on the land before now, it was always known that there could and most likely would be a home on this land. I ask now that the priority be given to protect the safety and property value of the land it was originally intended as residential. So hopefully that made sense. But again, I just feel like the abundance of information that's presented in our non-legal estimation is not relevant, but what is relevant is that the conditional use permit are not, they're not being met. And secondly, it very much is a safety hazard, and if anyone is interested, I have a video clip from on April 1st where it shows, you know, an airplane just buzzing right over the top of the Rupert's house. Again, whether it was harassment or what, I don't know, but it's, so does anyone want to see this? Or you can just see it's like a big hazard, a very big hazard. Does anyone?
I suppose there's a way to display that, Chris, is there?
I'm checking out my adapters, see what they've got.
Again, we apologize for not being professionally prepared, and I'm not the one to speak. I don't do this. I'm a nervous wreck, and hopefully that does not impact anyone's opinion.
You don't have to apologize.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
when there was another airport approved in Mendon, south of town,
Chris,
Yeah.
what kind of adapter are you looking for?
and I actually got a USB tied to this, or whatever that might work.
We might have to be creative. We have,
Anyhow, do you guys recall one of the neighbors at that time that was showing a picture of a plane buzzing?
Yes.
And that actual, I think what they were more concerned about there was there wasn't specific identification on the plane that they could report it to the FAA.
Yeah.
But that, I don't know if it's gonna be the same video that they have here. But that one, buzzed, you can see it under the eaves of the home to the east.
that's a USB-C.
I remember that.
And-
Across the street from them, you get that every time the crop sprayer comes over.
They weren't crop spraying.
Yeah, I know. That's right.
It just seems like a simple matter that shouldn't be a runway in a residential area.
Chris, do you want this charger and see if it would it work?
We have to have something that goes from USB-C to something here. We don't have the right adapter for that.
You can go ahead and finish, ma'am.
I don't know what else to say, except it seems obvious that their safety is number one concern. People, homes, children, their safety should be number one concern. And the fact that they have property rights as well. And I can pass this around or if you want to gather around and see how close this airplane is to the top of their house. It's undoubtedly a big safety concern. And we can prove the date on here. There's no question it's a safety concern.
Well, thank you. Commissioners, would anyone like to view the video at this point? You okay? Okay.
It's super close.
I think we'll take your description. We appreciate it. Chris, would you like to touch on your points? I know that you were interested in making.
I think there's a couple things that are pertinent. Some things I'm frustrated by that aren't pertinent, but some things that are pertinent. The FAA was contacted. It is true that the discussion that was had with Mrs. Holyoke was that I would contact them and figure out some information and then convey that information. If they'd like to set something up, I'm happy to attend. I don't think they've made efforts to make that happen. But I'm not concerned with the question that I asked and the answer that the FAA provided regarding the runway protection zone not adjusting based on changing the traffic pattern out of the airport. The other thing that I think is important to point out when we talk about state code and Title 17, 27A, 506 about conditional uses, there are lots of options given to the commission. They aren't wholly focused on what was described a moment ago. So you have the ability to approve with conditions, and to deny requests, even and to impose conditions on applications. And that's something you have to figure out and feel out to see if there is reasonable justification to take those actions, whatever they may be. So I think there's flexibility beyond the scope of what was described. That's all I'm going to point to there. And that your actions can be within any of those pieces. I'm going to ignore that one. And something else I think that we need to talk about is the fact and the role that staff plays for the commission, and the perception that staff is somehow obstructing information that gets to the commission. I think it's misrepresentative of what staff does for the commission. Staff, specifically me, functions as secretary for the commission to provide you information and help with process and function and flow and just basic operations. Staff is also tasked with providing information to the commission to make decisions. Staff has provided a significant amount of information. The fact that they disagree doesn't mean that it's misrepresented or obstructed. So I think that has been misrepresented for how the relationship works. Even though it was referenced as not a specific point, it sure made a point to say it wasn't intended to make a point. That sounded very circular, but I find that a bit unfortunate that it would be perceived that way, because we work pretty hard to be transparent with our commission, with our council, and we answer questions as they come, and we're very open with our folks we work with, often to our detriment. And so I don't appreciate the comments there, but I like the opportunity to defend myself on occasion. But what I think is important, and why I was so, I still haven't reviewed this, why I was so clear in what I think is important from staff standpoint, is I think all the information's there. And I think staff has made their points, and I think they've made their points. I think we disagree on the runway protection zone and how it's affected. I don't think, one piece I do need to address, and I'm going to pull up our county code, since there was a reference to that, and how it references this circular. Because I think that is important. I'm glad that they brought that up, and I don't think it's as cloudy as it's been portrayed.
It's in footnote 1, if it will help speed up the process for this.
I think it's best to read it on the screen for reference. So this is 5810 private airport. You have the general definition of what an airport is. The piece that was referenced that I'm aware of, again, I haven't read it in their description, is item 2, where it states that a copy of the design criteria as per the current FAA Airport Design Advisory Circular AC 150/5300-13A as applicable to the type of aircraft proposed to operate at the site. So that is a requirement that must be provided at the time of an application. So that has to be there. The next sentence says that the said design criteria must be implemented at the site. So when we talk about a specific type of aircraft for a certain location for a runway, there are specific criteria that apply to that aircraft and to that runway, and that includes runway protection zones. That includes a lot of things. No matter how long the document is, it doesn't mean it's incomprehensible. It doesn't mean it can't be perceived. It doesn't mean it can't be understood. I think it's pretty clear that the runway protection zones do apply. There's a very specific requirement stated there for the design for how those are applied and how they're not applied, specific to takeoff and landing locations. It's very clear. And so while there's the perception that it isn't clear, I fully disagree with that statement. And we can pull up those sections that clearly point to it and assert the priority of the runway protection zone and the protection of property and people on the ground, separate from airspace. And that's just how those are drafted, and it's how those were written. I don't think it's confusing in whatever degree. And that was my conversation with the FAA. I made a decision, contacted them and said, this is my perception of this. Is this correct? And they're like, yeah, those don't adjust together. The one adjusts on its own, the other stays. That's applicable to the ground. It's not applicable to airspace. And so I encourage the applicant to contact the FAA, since it appears that they have not, and ask that same question I asked and see if they get the same response. Now, if they got a different response, that would certainly raise a question in my mind. But if they haven't been contacted to even ask the same question, it's been months since we've been pursuing this. I question, anyway, I don't need to say more there. The thing that I'm focusing on is that I think it's very clear that the county code requires that they meet and apply the design criteria of that circular. Simply stated. And that's the rest of my comments.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Commissioners, any other questions for staff?
No, I had one, but he answered it through that discussion, so.
Okay. Well, we've heard a lot about this for a while. Some of us were around when the original CUP was approved. So I do think, as has been pointed out, there's a number of options for us tonight, right? We could say that with these changes, we're comfortable with it and we won't revoke the CUP. We can say things have changed. Based on these conditions, we can revoke the CUP. We can continue this item for a little bit longer if those of you want to find out more from the FAA or whatever, or encourage staff to meet with the Holyoaks and reach out to the FAA together or something like that. I mean, I think there are a number of options that we can do. So I leave it to you. What would you like to do on this item tonight?
Mr. Chair, if I could just interject
Sure,
something
go
really
ahead.
quick. Just to reinforce your understanding of what your ability is to do regarding private airports. Federal law has no regulation of private airports. The FAA does not regulate private airports. They recommend that people follow what design criteria that they publish in their circulars, but federal law does not control private airports. That is left to the states and the municipalities. And in the state of Utah, there's only one section, code section 7210.116b, that says the use of private landing fields must not impose a hazard upon person or property of others. And the regulation of private airports, apart from that, is left to local municipalities. And so, I just want to reinforce to you that the land use, decision that you make, it's down to you. The FAA would not, want to opine on the land use of a particular private airport. And they would not take that, that burden of adjudicating whether or not something meets the land use requirements of a municipality. That's left to the municipalities, and that determination is made by you. Whether, I'm not commenting on whether or not it would be advisable or whether or not somebody should reach out to the FAA, but I am just saying that to reinforce you in your understanding that it's your decision whether or not this follows the land use code according to your understanding. So.
Okay, thank you. Questions for council?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Would it be appropriate if each one of us took just a minute and expressed our thoughts or questions?
I think that would be great. Yeah, please.
My thoughts are this, I'm just looking at how to, the word came up, mitigate, how to mitigate the effects of both parties. We have somebody that has a CUP that wants to look at all the opportunity, but at the same time, we have surrounding neighbors that don't want the effects of the CUP affecting them. And so to try to mitigate all the effects of everything, I'm looking at possible best option would be the revocation of the CUP, which would still allow this Holyoke to still fly, but at the same time protect the interest of the surrounding parties at the same time. It's somewhat of a compromise. I don't know if that's compromise is a good word here, but where we're dealing with the CUP, but it's definitely an option to kind of take care of all the property rights.
Thanks, Brandon. What about you, Brady?
So, I, like Chris said, I was here when this was born and have been with it since, and I know that, I feel that the county and us as the commission have put in great effort to protect this CUP and to allow it to proceed. But I have two problems today with it. And I really feel, personally, I feel that we need to make a decision tonight, one way or another, so that we don't waste people's money, we don't waste any more people's time. My two concerns are, as has been presented previously, when this was initially presented, and I, as I recall, I could be wrong, but either the neighbors weren't contacted or didn't understand it, because we didn't have any opposition or very little when this was presented. The reason it was presented was because somebody had landed a plane literally on a road in Mendon, and the county was looking at some ways to make it safe for everybody, but get something uniform. We were never intending to make this a Dallas airport or anywhere else. This was simply a private airport that could be used occasionally by the owners. Anyhow, two key points that stand in my mind with that conditional use permit was that if a structure was ever built within the runway protection zone, and it was agreed upon by the commission as well as the applicant, that the CUP would be done, as my memory is correct. So today, I feel we now have a structure in that runway protection zone. I feel that it should be revoked. I'm not even going to touch on the fact that to have a CUP, that it has to be used within a 12-month period. We don't know if it has or it hasn't, but it's drug on way too long. And I feel that at this point that if there could be, whether the FAA is involved, whatever else, my personal opinion is I feel we need to revoke this CUP and start over again with a new one, because things have changed since this CUP was put in place.
Okay, thanks, Brady. What about you, Melinda?
Yeah, mine's similar to Brady's. I was not here when this was originally done. I do think we need to decide tonight. And same thing, my understanding of these conditional use permits, whatever conditions are put on them, that's what they need to be held to after that. And so what Chris says makes sense to me. With the RPZ, that's what was tied to it at that time. And the quote, like, that we had in previous meetings where, you know, they did the recordings and pulled out the quotes. Yes, we understand if a home is ever built, then this won't happen. So, yeah, I would vote to revoke.
Nathan?
I'm a little half and half, similar to Brandon, and I think, Brady, so this may not be all of Condition 8, but it does state that if a structure is built within the zone, not that it must be revoked, but it must be reconsidered. I think that's why we're here to start with, right? Because something was built there, it didn't necessarily it would cease, that it would have to be reconsidered, and so that's what we're doing. But then after listening to Chris and the conversation he had with the FAA and then with council on you know, we control what's on the ground, and that's the runway protection zone, and if in the code, you know, that doesn't change with the flight pattern, unfortunately. And so I think to me that code as currently written and interpreted by staff, we would have to revoke, which I think is a little unfortunate because I think that better flying pattern is probably safer for the neighbors than now the intermittent flying that can happen with no control over how they land or take off. And so I think the CUP actually gives the neighbors protection there. Now they can intermittently land with no set flight pattern. I mean, hopefully they will still use the safest one, but it's not a set thing anymore. So that's why but I think based on, I think we've got to revoke it. Currently would be my vote.
Can I add one more thing, Chris?
Please.
Just in the conversations and the accusations back and forth and not knowing, you know, vocabulary or words or the right way to say things, or like to her where she's saying, I'm sorry, I don't know how to present. Like, that's what this is. We're all lay people. We're not expected to be attorneys. We're expected to do the best that we can with the information given. And I believe staff does a great job, and they've never held back. And even when we try to ask questions ahead of time, they're like, we can't discuss that outside of the meeting. Like, I get no hint of anything trying to be done under the table or behind the scenes or withholding any information at all.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. And my thoughts as a person who was here when the original CUP, and I certainly remember it like Brady does, and of course the minutes reflect what we were thinking at that time. So, yeah, I don't think I need to add any more. The points have been made by other commissioners. So what would you like to do? Would somebody like to make a motion so we can move along?
I'd be willing to make a motion.
Okay.
And I don't know what verbiage we need to, do we have verbiage for or against?
Yeah, the staff has their recommendation at the bottom.
I've only prepared a recommendation to revoke.
At the bottom. Yep.
I will use the recommendation for denial as presented by the staff. Again, my key point, I guess, is C, that structures were built in the runway protection zone, but may I make a recommendation or suggestion that we revoke the CUP for the Holyoke Airport based upon the requirements of the county land use code and 1A, B, and C, that conditions of the conditional use permit have not been met.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and second.
Can I read this back to you to make sure I have it the way you want? So I have Christensen motion to revoke the Holyoke Airport conditional use permit based on the requirements of the county land use code and the conditions that it cannot meet the conditions of the original CUP.
That the conditions of the conditional use permit have not been met.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you for your time and patience on this one. It's come a long way.
I serve on the planning commission for Providence. I know that you guys serve. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mr. Chambers. Okay, our next item on the agenda is more discussion on airports, I believe.
Yeah, that's me. Sorry, I might need that.
Oh, you need it.
And we've got a staff report coming, or a update from staff?
We can just review that information that was submitted to the commission.
The memorandum?
Correct. I'll try and, Thanks for your patience. We've been short-staffed today, so we're kind of feeling like we're running around with our chickens with our heads cut off, so.
Story of your life over there, isn't it?
Yeah, it has been for the last little bit.
Tough duty.
So just as a reminder, we had this come up as a discussion end of last year. As we started to talk about airports, we've had commissioners, council members ask us, why don't we have something addressing this issue around airports? Because they keep having complaints come to them. And I think some of you have had, I don't recall who, it's been long enough I don't recall. But the request has been that we make some updates. The last time I met with you or discussed this, we put out some options to say, do you want to approach this from some different ways? These are those ways that we discussed. Leave the code as it is, but impose conditions related to noise impact and mitigation. Amend the code to require a sound study specific to noise impact. Amend the code to require that all zones and areas related to the private runway or other property of the airport operator. That was a recommendation that came specifically after our last one with Janos Locatos on the runway that he put in. His was more contained on his property or within his property, but that question came up again. Or a combination of all the above or any other options. What I ended up doing is looking at that and I made a combination of what was there. So as you look at the proposal, oh, sorry, I missed a couple, I forgot. Limit use to a specific zone or create an additional buffer beyond the required zones and areas. What I'm proposing is that we clean up the language a little bit in this description, and then we implement the sound report and the location specifics. So anything that can be perceived as a nuisance from a sound standpoint may be able to be addressed here. I think it needs some more work, but I think this is a first draft to have some more discussion about. And then also the location would have to be fully within the boundaries of the property owner. That's the same thing that is recommended and sometimes required, well, primarily recommended in that design criteria that we talked about just a second ago, that any of the zones, any of these areas, specifically the runway protection zone, needs to be owned by the airport operator, or needs to have some sort of significant lease that allows them to have a right to operate and use that land without obstruction. That removes the likelihood of someone building next to this property, a property, and having a structure on it. So it takes away that issue and that conflict that we saw come up multiple times with different airports, not just the Holyoke Airport, but this came up with the Musselman Airport. It was a discussion with the Locatos. It's just been a conversation point every time. So I think of all those things, location is the most important. We address that and make sure all the airport pieces are contained within property they control or own. The sound report, we copied language that came from our kennel piece. And so the 10 decibel rating may or may not be a good measure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask for that. That seems pretty low for a vehicle of any sort. I mean, I'm guessing a chainsaw is much over 10 decibels.
Well, and sound is funny, it's algorithmic, and so over time it changes, and as you get, it doesn't build the same. So something, a 1 decibel increase is, well, I'm forgetting my decibel stuff now, wow, I better not talk, until I get it straight. Basically, I'll just say it's algorithmic, so just to advance from 1 to 2 isn't just advancing 1, it's almost, it's a double, similar.
Exponential.
Yeah.
It's exponential in its growth. And so I would like to do some additional work to say what that 10 decibel or whatever it should be if we're talking about airplanes, and what's actually a reasonable number.
And I would say maybe if we could find other communities that have similar noise ordinances for private airports might be a good place.
Yes.
I can't imagine you would ever meet that with, unless it was a glider that you
Right.
could, that you could take off with a slingshot.
Like if we allow airports, you just know it's gonna be loud when they take off
I
and
mean,
land.
but, you know, and even the Holyoke, I believe theirs were the airplanes that they had mitigated to make them less noisy.
Some
So
could
there's
put a
things-
muffler or something on.
Yeah, there's things you can do, and so I think we should look into that a little more and what that.
I agree.
What that
Yeah, that's the only component that I have questions on, and I mean, frankly, it could go away, and I'd still be supportive of the other items.
Even that location one, I think.
Absolutely.
I think that's the priority.
I think that's the key.
I feel we're giving the applicant a false hope if we don't require them to own the runway protection zone.
Yeah.
Because if we tell them you put it in for a year and 12 months later or 6 months later, somebody builds a house,
And it may not be a house.
then we just give them a false hope.
Maybe
because-
someone that's against it and just builds a shed.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wouldn't
so
take much to
I
take
feel
that
that's
out.
extremely
If they own the
important.
ground,
Personally,
they're safe.
I'm not in favor of the noise ordinance unless we
I think it's
really know
hard.
what we're doing.
It's hard to administer.
Yeah.
From the back end standpoint, it's hard to administer.
The sound thing
Yeah.
is, and
I
so
thought
I
that
think,
too. I was
I
like,
think,
who's
Your
gonna
friends
do
might bring their
that?
plane in and that doesn't meet it.
She's gonna bring her phone, you know, someone's
Well-
gonna bring their phone with a recording, I mean, you can't measure off of a
The
video.
other concern I
no, I
have.
mean, there are protocols, you know, excuse me, Brady, there are protocols, you know, for the noise stuff and, you know, scientific protocols that can be adopted or incorporated. I think our kennel one does that. But for me, the question is, you know, because I recognize that it's borrowed language, you know, is 10 decibels appropriate? And then sort of, you know, is at the property line, does that make sense? Or who cares if the nearest sound receiver is a mile away, you know? Who cares what the noise is at the property line? But anyway, I think the idea of, you know, researching if there are some noise ordinances associated with airports or something like that might be helpful to maybe craft this a little bit better on the sound.
Something that we've looked at before, regard to the dogs and probably some other things.
Motorbikes.
Was that motorbikes?
We had 2 motocross
That's true.
tracks that we.
That's right.
And I'm fine with that, but my concern here is somebody moves into an area and you got a farmer out bailing at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then they're gonna start trying to push it on other things, so I'm opposed to the noise.
We'd like to see an actual nuisance ordinance, the county doesn't have one specific to noise. That's a discussion we've had with the attorney's office before Taylor was here, before John was here, I think. But it just nothing happened with that. And that's not just on the attorney's office, the council has to decide if that's something they feel is a priority. And that wouldn't exist in the land use code, we're doing the lift because it doesn't exist elsewhere in the county code.
Do you feel like, from the comments you've heard so far, you're getting what you're looking for, or is there something specific you'd like from us on this tonight?
I think I have good direction there, in the
Okay.
sense that location, I feel like we're on the same page, that location's the primary
Absolutely.
importance, and that the sound may work if there's some additional facts, details that support how that might actually work, and if there's something to substantiate that.
Yeah.
How do you measure, how do you administer that?
Right, we've had a lot of nuisance things come up in our city recently, because once you put that law in place, then anybody can come and say, my neighbor is violating this, and then we as a city have to go, oh, that's obnoxious to you, but, you know, and you write it sort of vague so that it can cover, but whatever you have in there, and however that neighbor interprets it, then you have to back it up as a city. So I'm sort of jealous that you don't have a nuisance ordinance, because whatever you put in place to protect each of us makes the city or the county then responsible to somehow enforce that. And you're usually getting involved in neighbor against neighbor, which nobody wants to do, and it just takes one, if not one, picky little neighbor to ruin it for a lot of people, or one other person.
The state code sets currently, we rely, I think the last one we had was some guy had 200 buffalo heads, he's a taxidermist, just outside Hyde Park. Just rotting in a big 10 by 10 dog kennel, big pile.
I might know who that is.
And it wasn't like he was being abusive to his neighbors, he just didn't think about what that was. But the funny thing is that because we didn't have a nuisance ordinance, we called Bear River Health and they're like, we can't help you. But state code has a rule that says if you have 3 neighbors that make a complaint, it actually goes to the fire chief for the county. And so when I told Ron Hammer that, he's like, what? I'm not dealing with that. Buffalo heads, and what am I supposed to do? Hose them down. It's just, there's not a good process in place. So that's why you see some of this stuff happening in the land use code to try to address these impacts. They are impacts.
Yeah.
But we're having to do a lot of research to figure out how do we address those pieces. So we'll dig into that. I'll look that up and see if there's some support for what that looks like elsewhere. And if there really isn't, then I would just ditch it.
Yeah.
If there is something that makes sense, then maybe we look at that.
Brady?
Well, I just wanted to add, one other thing that you might want to make a note of if we do go to a noise ordinance is agriculture also uses the spray planes. And I can tell you right now that they're spraying probably 5 miles from my house, and it is loud.
They go
way loud.
Well, and I think this would only pertain to the private airports code.
Well, I'm just saying,
They may
I'm fine
refuel
with it.
some of those sometimes.
I'm fine with it because I understand that's what they're doing. I'm not complaining about it. I wouldn't want this to inflict on that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And I don't think I'm not pushing that we have to have a nuisance ordinance right now. I'm not gonna do that lift. But we might just have it focused on a land use piece, whatever's on the ground, we can address. If it's just up in the air, that's, fault the state code right now, and Rob Hammer can sort that out. As needed. It doesn't come up very often in the county. Because most people understand what the county is. We've had some exceptions. That's all of it from staff's perspective.
Okay. And then, any other questions on the changes that Chris is discussing on the airports? If not, that last item, recreational facility, Chris, did you want to? You've got 4 minutes.
Oh. Was there also?
Unless you want something more than 4 minutes.
Was there also site grading on the agenda?
No.
You didn't put it back on there.
We'll let that one,
expecting to
we'll
see
kick
it.
that one, punt that one to July.
And the reason I say you only have 4 minutes is just because of our statutory meeting closure, and which we can extend if you need more time, Tim.
Well, I do want to watch the Celtics and Warriors too, so. I think this can be very brief. I think there's been some good conversation about options for accommodating RVs in other locations than the A10 zone. I should say an RV campground. But we have talked about the potential for an agritourism avenue where one per parcel could be part of an agritourism element to accommodate a dry site overnight stay. And then we've also talked about the potential, which I think the Planning Commission had a very good and creative discussion, and that was to maybe explore an overlay where a larger campground project could be considered, but the criteria for that and where and how to apply it and what design standards and conditions would be quite a substantial effort to study where and how that might be appropriate. So with that being said, and given that we are currently under the pending application status of this application to amend the code, our recommendation to you is that we proceed with amending the recreational facility to remove campground as an allowed use in a recreational facility, with the understanding that at a later point, agritourism could be looked at comprehensively, because there are more aspects to amend than just this one component of agritourism. There's, you know, everything from reindeer to cattle to all kinds of things need to be looked at in agritourism. And so our recommendation would be to proceed with a hearing to amend recreational facility, similar to what's shown here. And then when there's the time and the priority and the capacity to amend agritourism, and then explore maybe an overlay zone for a different type of RV campground standard and zone, that we could pick that up at a later point. But we have a few more months with our pending application. Is it a 6-month window that applicant?
6 months.
So I think we're approaching 4 months into that. And if we set a hearing here at the Planning Commission and a hearing with council, we'd be pushing that 6-month window to have the opportunity to take campground out of recreation facility definition.
So if campgrounds are not allowed as a recreational facility, then what are they? A commercial enterprise? I mean, like, where do campgrounds go if they want to? I mean, because we're not saying there can be no campgrounds in Cache County. I mean, that seems silly.
That's never be updated, though.
I think the hope is that they'll be allowed in the FR 40 zone, and maybe that's the adjustment that needs to be made here. Is the concern is what's happening in the 810 zone.
Yeah.
Not I think with what's happening in the FR 40 zone, which is specific to recreation. There's an expectation of that type of use in the forest recreation zone. 810, you've got ag, you've got houses. It's not the same.
That's more like just changing the use chart, right?
It is, but this is tied to the recreation facility use. Campgrounds doesn't exist in its own sense other than as a definition in the use-related, the general definitions. We define campground.
Yeah.
So another opportunity would be to say, as Tim's amended here, the following is, let's see, the term recreational facility includes but is not limited to the following ski facility or golf course. We take campgrounds out, but that means we just create a new use type that says campground.
Yeah, they got to fit somewhere.
Not permitted in everything but FR 40.
Okay.
And then that covers that base.
Okay.
And it's not like a wholesale, like, we hate campgrounds.
FR 40 or the resort recreation zone.
Or resort recreation.
I mean, it's not just FR 40, but I would say.
But there might be a gap in time between this amendment and when new standards are adopted for accommodating campgrounds, so.
Don't have to be, though.
Doesn't have to be.
I think I would encourage staff to marry those. I mean, if we're gonna say, yeah, let's put it on next month's agenda as a public hearing, I would say that, and here's the new use chart for campground.
Yeah, I feel like that's fairly straightforward.
I mean, we can make that happen, and yeah, I think that's straightforward for us.
We really do need it, and we need to plan for it.
There are, just one aspect of the FR 40 is sometimes those are right next to A10 zones and not too far away from communities. And so the access to and from could be similar to what so there still could be some issues and some conditions and.
There's always gonna be NIMBYs and clamor.
You're gonna have your fire risk increases, right, if you go into this, so yeah, there's gonna be.
The visibility of it.
I feel like we're sophisticated enough or not sophisticated enough to let that bother us, you know?
But municipalities are struggling with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richmond had to enforce on a guy that had 2 campers in his yard because they had nowhere to go. And that they have, I guess, the same 30-day. They could stay there for 30 days, but they had to get them for non-compliance. And they had to tell them, pack it up and move.
Yeah. And the Forest Service is every 14 days. And so there are rules that people are following in other jurisdictions that are reasonable or are supposed to be followed.
So, I mean, this FR 40 zone, there's not much, right, in the
valley?
In the valley,
Yeah.
correct.
Like a whole
Mostly
bunch.
at the south end.
To the east.
It's mostly forested
South end.
areas.
A little
Yeah.
pocket out by Clarkston,
I mean,
Off by Mendon,
South
for
of
example,
Paradise.
there's the FR 40 by the
Wellsville.
now
Mendon.
funded Deep Canyon Trailhead, which maybe you caught wind of that, but that would not be received well in that area, for example. And yeah, it's right near that access to the wilderness experience, and so, and there would be traffic impacts and so on. So I could see it still being controversial in an FR 40, some areas of FR 40 more than others, and I don't know how much thought and
That would have
analysis needs to be looked at.
That would have to be better received by the public. Forest recreation zone,
You would sure think, but.
I know.
Yeah, but some of it's closer to communities than other areas of FR 40 is I think the sentiment I'm sharing, but.
So I think
nonetheless,
that
I
would be
hear the
our
direction.
suggestion, Tim. Just
Okay.
let's bring it back next month and with an amended use chart too.
Okay.
In a public hearing, we ought to be able to hear from people what they want or expect.
Our last campground thing, I think it was more of an issue of, we're having a trailer park versus a campground. I mean, the scope of it's this. So is there a place for a trailer park? I mean, is there a difference?
It was
I was-
directly proximate to the city boundary also, where you have these neighborhoods that are more dense,
Right.
more expensive homes. There's just this concern of,
But is there a place for a trailer park in a more commercial zone where they have 10 acres in a commercial zone where they can, and nobody's gonna want it, but is there a place for it?
Most cities and jurisdictions have gone away from
Yeah.
trailer parks.
Now, I
but-
had a guy approach me maybe 2 weeks ago, came to Hyde Park City and described what he wants to do. He's got something like it down in Utah County, but it sounds like
Tiny
a
homes?
trailer park.
Oh.
People are done living in their home. They don't want anything bigger. They wanna just live in their RV.
And a lot of them just come for the summer, 'cause they go
But
south in the
he's
winter.
saying even year round, and I'm like,
Some
well,
of them-
you're gonna
some of them do.
freeze your pipes if you're there year round. He goes, well, they take precautions. But I'm like, well, try the county, like, our city doesn't want you, right?
that's where these are coming from.
I know.
Because Mendon was.
When I said that, I was like,
Well, that's what we're fighting.
not my right hand, try my left hand.
Mendon was considering approving one to meet their low-income housing.
Yeah.
So Mendon, I mean, they've adjusted their ordinances other ways to get there, but that was one of their original considerations, approve a trailer park to meet their low-income housing.
Yeah,
So
one
they
of
don't
his,
get cut
I
off
mean,
from
he was
state
saying he
funding.
would build like this building and it would look like an old, like an old western town, and he'd do the facades of, and whether that would be a laundromat or, I don't know, a gift shop, or I don't know what he would have in there, but it would be, for that community that lived there. And so nice looking, of course, and it's like, yeah, there probably is a need for that, and yeah, you're not gonna find anyone in Cache Valley that wants that. I mean, any city or community probably that wants to have that, but
You know,
should
the
there
fun-
be a place
There's
for
one like
it?
that, just like that in St. George. We've stayed at, there's a swimming pool, it's well organized.
It's
There's a
it's
place
just a
for
more
it.
developed KOA.
There you go.
There's
Well,
the-
Bear Lake, there's the KOAs, there's the whatever else, there's places.
I mean, you look at the trailer park on the west side of Logan that I drive by all the time on Fourth West or whatever. It's nice. Like, it isn't, but everybody has seen the ones that aren't nice, and that's what they remember, right? But that one's been there for decades, and it's well kept and well maintained, and I'm sure I mean, as we all see the home values and property values go up or whatever, folks are struggling to, just have a place to be, and so sometimes these things might be a good option for folks, but nobody wants them in their backyard, right?
And maybe as a final separate staff report or update is potential for a quarterly joint council and commission meeting. Believe it or not, the quarter is upon us. It's the month of June. And so Janine is pulling council members to see if June 21st or 22nd could be a possible
What for again?
a quarterly joint commission and council meeting. And so the proposal would be from 3:30 to 5 on either Tuesday, the 21st, or Wednesday, the 22nd of June. And I'm just kind of waiting to hear back what works
No,
best
for
for
me, it'd have to
council.
be the 22nd.
Okay?
I can do either of those, that whole time.
I don't know yet, I'd have to get back.
Okay.
And it was the council that brought that up. They want to continue to meet commission. They really valued that last meeting that we had.
Okay.
It could be here in this room or the event center, I think voting.
The multi-purpose room?
Yeah, multi-purpose room will be preoccupied.
Probably by elections.
Elections,
But you said the afternoon, didn't you, like before 5?
3 to 5.
Chris, what's next month look like?
Next month, Angie's not feeling well, but she's been texting us nonstop. So if you're paying attention, Angie, thanks for keeping us awake with your texting. She said if they ask, what is upcoming? More rezones and Cherry Peak CUP.
Wow.
There'll be a new Cherry Peak CUP amendment coming.
That's fun.
There you go. She anticipated.
She's smart that way. Okay, anything else, commissioners?
No, thank you for
Okay.
ending the Holyoke.
Without objection,
Like,
we'll
just the
adjourn.
discussion, not necessarily revoking it. Just thank you for stopping talking about it.
If you'll stop the.
Hopefully we can all move on, but I have a feeling we're just coming back or we're gonna get sued or something. Right?
Not you, but the recorder stopped.
Me too, no.